over the years that have made their own collection and donated it to the museum. So you've got colonial stuff, you've got Indian stuff, you've got 1880 stuff, you've got 1900 displays. But keep in mind that 1942, Hitler was annoyed with us, so he sent his best U-boat captains here, called Operation Drumbeat, and at night they would see ships burning offshore. And we had no defense against them whatsoever. So one morning, some 34 private pilots flew their own airplanes into Flagler Beach, landed on this emergency airmail strip, and flew 17,000 combat hours against those German U-boats in these little putt-putt-putt primitive airplanes. They fitted them with 100-pound bombs. God help them if they ever got close enough to drop the bomb, because the submarines could have blown them out of the air. But what they did is they forced the German subs to submerge. When they saw this little putt-putt-putt airplane coming at them, they had no idea what defense the airplane had, so they would submerge. Well, a submerged German U-boat wasn't very fast. It was only about 7 to 8 knots underwater. So they couldn't catch the tankers. So these little putt-putts flying these combat hours hundreds of miles out to sea actually made it so that some of the ships survived. They weren't sunk. And it was an amazing thing. And that's what this event is all about. And this is the forming of the Civil Air Patrol, too. And there's some of your pilots. Now, there's an awful lot of history here. This was once called Ocean City. And we're basically on a big sandbar. And you'll notice that that's brown sand, which is quite unique. That is the remnants of these coquina rocks, which are millions of years old and exist as big reefs offshore. So we have this brown sand. And this was always an attraction here, but kind of brings up another story a little bit, because going back a year or two, around 1565, in the months of November, we always had big storms here. Great violent storms would happen here. I'm not with the Chamber of Commerce. And these were called nor'easters. And they were bad storms that would occur right here. So the French Protestants, which were called Huguenots, didn't like the Spanish all that much, because the Spanish were Catholic. So there was a fleet of soldiers arrived here to destroy the new settlement in St. Augustine. But what happened, they got caught in one of these nor'easter storms, and the fleet was wrecked, and the ships were sunk or driven ashore. Now, one of the ships not only got ashore, but everybody survived. So there were about 340 Spanish, or rather French soldiers, we called them Huguenots, they were French Protestants, walking up this beach, right here, the one you see, hoping to get refuge at a fort called Fort Caroline, which was up at present-day Jacksonville. Now, what they didn't know is that the Spanish had already gone north, destroyed and captured the fort, and killed everybody. They were met at a place called Marineland today. There's a place called Penguin Inlet. We call that whole area Matanzas, which means place of murder. Now, unfortunately, the Spanish were in a condition where they felt they had to murder or kill all these French refugees, which they did. Some survived, but for the bulk they were murdered. Today, most historians believe that this occurred just north of Marineland at a place called Penguin Inlet. Now, everybody disagrees. It doesn't matter. The French were as dead whether they died there or died a little bit north. But in any event, there's a story here, the 1500s. This is about the time, it wasn't so long after Columbus. You had these shipwrecked sailors walking north on this brown sand beach. Keep in mind that this is a great sandbar. There's nothing protecting you from a hurricane here, nothing whatsoever. This is just a big pile of sand. So all these new homes, all these beautiful houses, these houses on Painter's Hill. By the way, Painter's Hill had nothing to do with Painter. It was John Painter, P-A-Y-N-T-E-R, but the sign says Painter, P-A-I-N-T-E-R. But anyway, these houses are perilously close to the ocean. And in my opinion, someday the ocean's going to come here and claim them. But you're right on the ocean, guys. And this road that we're on didn't exist. This is A1A. Now, talking about plantations, we had Mr. Hernandez. Mr. Hernandez was the son of Martin Hernandez, who was one of the Minorcan settlers brought over in New Smyrna. And during the American Revolution, they came north on Old Kings Road, escaping through Flagler County, actually coming right through where the Ag Museum is today. There was a sawmill there at that time called Hewitt's Mill. And these early Minorcan refugees who were fleeing the Minorcan settlement in New Smyrna came right through Hewitt's Mill. But in any event, their son was Mr. Hernandez, and he was educated as a lawyer. He became a great landowner in Florida, and he owned 3 main plantations. One was St. Joseph's, which is in downtown Palm Coast. The second was called Malacompra, which where we're going right now. And the third was Buena Vista, which today is Washington Gardens. Now, it might be of interest to you, if you picked up this morning's paper, you'll see there was a big hoorah. I mean, there were hundreds of people at the county commission meeting raising all sorts of Ned about giving away space and land within Malacompra, which is presently a county park. And there are many people in favor of it, many people bitterly opposed. There's been all sorts of accusations being thrown around, and this is going on right now. But guys, this is Florida. This is the way Florida developed, and it never ends, it never stops. It's an endless, continuous thing. But we're headed right now for Malacompra, which is called Bad Deal, and this was one of the Hernandez plantations. And of course, they raised rice there. I don't think they raised any sugar cane, but they raised Sea Island cotton, and they had slaves. This was actually built on the site of a much older plantation, which was established by the DuPont family. The DuPonts were by far one of the earliest settlers in this area, and they predated the Hernandez by many, many years. But they were driven away here in 1802 by an Indian attack. But at Malacompra, one of our county attorneys by the name of Al Hadid, who was a great historian, got a large grant, government grant, to do an archaeological site, and they dug up the old plantation kitchen of the Malacompra. And they made a marvelous dig there. They got thousands of artifacts, and they built an enclosure over it. And this is another place that you should visit, because it's all rigged with lights and sound. You can press buttons and hear voices, strange voices and so forth, and see the kitchen area of this Malacompra plantation. Now we're moving into the hammock. The hammock is a very, very old area. This not only had plantations here, but the ancient Indians would come here. For thousands of years, they would come here to enjoy seafood, to eat oysters, to live on the beach in the summertime. Then in the wintertime, the ancient Indians would move back inland where they lived in towns. And they had regular villages with houses, with roofs. This was not John Wayne land. They lived in towns. We know they did. We have sort of a generic term for them. They're called Tomokan Indians, but that, as usual, wasn't their real name. They had many different names. But there were people here for thousands and thousands of years. The hammock area developed very much without much zoning, and they just assumed that county and city authorities stay away, because these are where your really old families live. There's a hardware store here that's owned by the family that sold the land to Bunnell in 1821. In other words, they've been here for hundreds of years. And there are old families in the hammock area that have lived here, as I say, for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's a very old, interesting area. They don't welcome visitors all that much. They just assume you not come here. But it is certainly an old place. The DuPonts, you know where the bridge is that goes over the road here? The bridge, that was a DuPont plantation, and it was a large DuPont plantation raising cotton and sugar. Right here. This was a DuPont plantation. I did a lot of research on this in something called The Search for the Lost Plantations, and the best reference were these old Spanish land grants, all of which were published by the University of Florida on their website called Florida Memories. And there's hundreds and hundreds of these Spanish land grants. You could get eye strain reading them, but I made an attempt, and you get a little bit of information here, a little bit of information there, but they're pretty fascinating. The Spanish gave out land grants like popcorn. The deal was, if you formed a plantation, invested in growing crops, invested in labor, and built your plantation, after 10 years you were entitled to have it surveyed, and if the Spanish authorities said you really had a plantation, the title would pass and you would own the land. Now we're going to make a short stop here, a little bathroom stop for about 10 minutes, and I want you to look across the Intercoastal and just sort of look what this place looked like. You're going to see a lot of the Great Swamp, which is very much there, and you're going to be amazed that people actually were able to come through here and settle this area. Now, one of my books called Gray Eyes is in conjunction with a great cattle drive that was made from Savannah down to New Smyrna, and they drove this immense herd, this very large herd of cows, right through what would become Flagler County. In fact, right through the area we're on right now. And we think that some of Old Kings Road was blazed by this big herd of cows who were following these ancient Indian ridges. I warned you when we began, there's no auto animatronics here. We have no stuffed Lincolns. We don't have people in white wigs that jump up at you. You just got to pretty much use your imagination. And sorry about that. Now, there's a restaurant here called Captain's Barbecue, which is pretty good barbecue. And if you read this morning's paper, you're going to read about the big hoorah. There is a big hoorah going on right now because Captain's wants to tear down the restaurant and build a real restaurant, a good one, on the site. And there's some people in favor and there's some people against. But if you want the details, read this morning's paper. Or it's also in a website called Flagler Live. Oh, there's the hardware store right there. That's the people that sold the land to Bunnell when they built the Bunnell plantation. You know, there's so many stories. The problem is you end up going down one trail and you find 15 other trails. And being me, I ended up writing books. But I tried to write down and document these stories as best I could. Sometimes I've been accused of using my imagination. I try to be accurate. Okay, this is Malacompra. We're turning in here, and you'll notice that covered area. That's the kitchen area of the old plantation. And on the far left is that controversial restaurant. And as I say again, right now there's a big controversy going on about that. But this is a great place to come on a Sunday, have a barbecue sandwich, sit out here, walk through this archaeological dig, press a few buttons, read a few signs, and meditate about what was here. You can also stand there, look across the intercoastal, and see what Flagler really looked like. That's the great swamp over there. There it is. And how the heck did they drive a herd of cows across? It just blows your mind. Okay, we're going to be here for only about 10 minutes, so this is a necessary stop. Don't go getting any sandwiches. You'll spoil your lunch.